Imagine yourself in the city of Athens near the close of the year 446 BC. The proud city, after many years of supremacy over the whole of central Greece, has passed her zenith, and is surely on the decline. She has never recovered from the blow received at Coronea. The year has been one of gloom and foreboding. The coming spring will bring the end of the 5 years' truce, and an invasion from the Peloponnesus is imminent. But, as the center of learning, refinement, and the arts, the luster of her fame is yet undimmed, and men of education throughout the world deem their lives incomplete until they have sought and reached this intellectual Mecca. During this year a stranger from Halicarnassus, in Asia Minor, after many years of travel in Asia, Scythia, Libya, Egypt, and Magna Graecia, has taken up his abode at Athens. He is still a young man, hardly 37, yet his fame is that of the first and greatest of historians. Dramatists and poets immortal there have been, but never man has written such exquisite prose. 20 centuries and more shall wear away, and his history will be read in 100 different tongues, as well as in the beautiful and simple Greek that he wrote. His name will grow into a household word, the schoolboy will revel in his delightful tales, and wise men will call him the father of history. For weeks the people of Athens have listened entranced to the public reading of his great work, and now the assembly has passed a decree tendering to him the city's thanks, together with a most substantial gift in recognition of his talents, a purse of money equal to 12,000 American dollars. Such is the account which Eusebius gives, and others to whom we may fairly accord belief, and it adds no slight tinge of romance to the picture to discover among the listening throng the figure of the boy Thucydides, moved to tears by the recital, who then and there received the impulse that made of him also a great student and writer of history. Herodotus, noticing how intensely his reading had affected the youth, turned to Olorus, the father of Thucydides, who was standing near, and said, "Olorus, thy son's soul yearns after knowledge." Herodotus was born at Halicarnassus, 484 BC, and died at Thurium in Italy, about the year 425. As in the case of Plutarch, our knowledge of his personal history is very meager, aside from the little we glean from his own writings. His parents, Lixis and Rheo, appear to have been of high rank and consideration in Halicarnassus, and possessed of ample means, and his acquaintance both at home and in Athens was of the best. A lover of poetry and a poet by nature, the whole plan of his work, the tone and character of his thoughts, and a multitude of words and expressions, show him to have been perfectly familiar with the Homeric writings. There is scarcely an author previous to his time with whose works he does not appear to have been thoroughly acquainted. Herodotus, to be sure, was almost the only writer of prose who had attained any distinction, for prose composition was practically in its infancy, but from him and from several others, too obscure even to be named, he freely quotes, while the poets, Hesiod, Olon, Musaeus, Archilochus, the authors of the Cypria and the Epigoni, Alcaeus, Sappho, Solon, Aesop, Aristeas, Simonides of course, Phrynichus, Aeschylus, and Pindar, are referred to, or quoted, in such a way as to show an intimate acquaintance with their works. The design of Herodotus was to record the struggles between the Greeks and barbarians, but, in carrying it out, as Wheeler, the English analyst of the writings of Herodotus, has happily expressed it, he is perpetually led to trace the causes of the great events of his history, to recount the origin of that mighty contest between liberty and despotism which marked the whole period, to describe the wondrous manners and mysterious religions of nations, and the marvelous geography and fabulous productions of the various countries, as each appeared on the great arena, to tell to an inquisitive and credulous people of cities vast as provinces and splendid as empires, of stupendous walls, temples and pyramids, of dreams, omens, and warnings from the dead, of obscure traditions and their exact accomplishment, and thus to prepare their minds for the most wonderful story in the annals of men, when all Asia united in one endless array to crush the states of Greece, when armies bridged the seas and navies sailed through mountains, when proud, stubborn-hearted men arose amid anxiety, terror, confusion, and despair, and staked their lives and homes against the overwhelming power of a foreign despot, till heaven itself sympathized with their struggles, and the winds and waves delivered their country, and opened the way to victory and revenge. The personal character of Herodotus, reflected from every page that he wrote, renders his vivid story all the more happily suited to the reading and study of boys and girls. He is as honest as the sun, equally impartial to friends and foes, candid in the statement of both sides of a question, and an artist withal in the gift of delineating a character or a people with a few rapid strokes, so bold and masterly that the sketch is placed before you with stereoscopic distinctness. For so early a writer, he presents a surprising unity of plan, combined with a variety of detail that is amazing. What if he does crowd and enrich his story with a world of anecdote? What if he feels bound always to paint for you the customs, manners, dress, and peculiarities of a people before he begins their history? This very biographical style is the charm of his pen. Like the flowers of the magnolia tree, his bright stories and vivid descriptions at times almost overwhelm the root and branch of his narrative, yet, after all, we remember the magnolia more because of its cloud of snowy bloom in the few fleeting days of May than for all its green and shade in the other months. Herodotus, to be sure, lacks that far-seeing faculty of discerning accurately the real causes of great movements, wars, and migrations of men, a faculty possessed preeminently by Thucydides and largely by Xenophon, but he is equally far removed from the coldness of the one and the ostentatious display of the other. He is above all things natural, simple, and direct. He writes, says Aristotle, sentences which have a continuous flow, and which end only when the sense is complete. I have allowed Herodotus, as I did Plutarch, to tell you his story in his own words, as closely as the English idiom can reproduce the spirit and flow of the Greek, calling gratefully to my aid the labors of such students, analysts, and translators of Herodotus as Rawlinson, Dalman, Carey, and Wheeler, and I have discarded from the text only what is indelicate to the modern ear, or what the young reader might find tedious, redundant, or irrelevant to the main story. But so small a part comes under this head, that I am sure I can fairly say to you, this is Herodotus himself. If you read him through and do not like him, who will be the disappointed one? Not you, but I. Book 1. Clio. Chapter 1. Origin of the War between the Greeks and Barbarians. This is a publication of the researches of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, made in order that the actions of men may not be effaced by time, and that the great and wondrous deeds displayed both by Greeks and barbarians may not be deprived of renown, and, furthermore, that the cause for which they waged war upon each other may be known. The learned among the Persians assert that the Phoenicians were the original authors of the quarrel, that they migrated from that which is called the Red Sea to the Mediterranean and, having settled in the country which they now inhabit, forthwith applied themselves to distant voyages, and that they exported Egyptian and Assyrian merchandise, touching at other places, and also at Argos. Argos, at that period, surpassed in every respect all those states which are now comprehended under the general appellation of Greece. They say, that on their arrival at Argos, the Phoenicians exposed their merchandise for sale, and that on the 5th or 6th day after their arrival, when they had almost disposed of their cargo, a great number of women came down to the seashore, and among them Io, the daughter of the king Inachus. While these women were standing near the stern of the vessel, and were bargaining for such things as most pleased them, the Phoenicians made an attack upon them. Most of the women escaped, but Io with some others was seized. Then the traders hurried on board and set sail for Egypt. Thus the Persians say that Io went to Egypt, and that this was the beginning of wrongs. After this certain Greeks, for they are unable to tell their name, having touched at Tyre in Phoenicia, carried off the king's daughter Europa. These must have been Cretans. Thus far they say that they had only returned like for like, but that after this the Greeks were guilty of the second provocation, for having sailed down in a vessel of war to Yar, a city of Colchis on the river Phocis, when they had accomplished the more immediate object of their expedition, they carried off the king's daughter Medea, and the king of Colchis, having dispatched a herald to Greece, demanded satisfaction and the restitution of the princess, but the Greeks replied, that as they of Asia had not given satisfaction for the stealing of Io, they would not give any to them. In the second generation after this, Alexander, the son of Priam, having heard of these events, was desirous of obtaining a wife from Greece by means of violence, being fully persuaded that he should not have to give satisfaction, since the Greeks had not done so. When, therefore, he had carried off Helen, The Greeks immediately sent messengers to demand her back again and require satisfaction, but when they brought forward these demands they were met with this reply: "You who have not yourselves given satisfaction, nor made it when demanded, now wish others to give it to you." After this the Greeks were greatly to blame, for they levied war against Asia before the Asiatics did upon Europe. Now, to carry off women by violence the Persians think is the act of wicked men. To trouble oneself about avenging them when so carried off is the act of foolish ones, and to pay no regard to them when carried off, of wise men, for it is clear, that if they had not been willing, they could not have been carried off. Accordingly the Persians say, that they of Asia made no account of women that were carried off, but that the Greeks for the sake of a Lacedaemonian woman assembled a mighty fleet, sailed to Asia, and overthrew the empire of Priam. From this event they had always considered the Greeks as their enemies, for the Persians claim Asia, and the barbarous nations that inhabit it, as their own, and consider Europe and the people of Greece as totally distinct. Such is the Persian account, and to the capture of Troy they ascribe the commencement of their enmity to the Greeks. As relates to Io, the Phoenicians do not agree with this account of the Persians but affirm that she voluntarily sailed away with the traders. I, however, am not going to inquire further as to facts, but having pointed out the person whom I myself know to have been the first guilty of injustice toward the Greeks, I will then proceed with my history, touching as well on the small as the great estates of men, for of those that were formerly powerful many have become weak, and some that were formerly weak became powerful in my time. Knowing, therefore, the precarious nature of human prosperity, I shall commemorate both alike. Croesus was a Lydian by birth, son of Aliates, and sovereign of the nations on this side the river Alise. This river flowing from the south between the Syrians and Paphlagonians, empties itself northward into the Euxine Sea. This Croesus was the first of the barbarians whom we know of that subjected some of the Greeks to the payment of tribute, and formed alliances with others. He subdued the Ionians and Oleans, and those of the Dorians who had settled in Asia, and formed an alliance with the Lacedaemonians, but before his reign all the Greeks were free.